My name is Eleanor, and for most of my life, I thought I was just an ordinary woman, an aging, retired nurse with a quiet, uneventful existence and more regrets than I cared to admit. I thought I understood faith, grace, and forgiveness, but it wasn't until the day my car skidded off an icy Montana road and I died. Yes, died, that everything changed. What I saw on the other side shattered everything I believed about myself and my purpose. I was shown the ripple effects of my smallest actions, confronted with the weight of my failures, and given a divine mission that would demand everything I had left to give. The wind howled against the car as I gripped the wheel, my knuckles pale, my breath fogging in the cold Montana air. Snow whipped in chaotic flurries, and the headlights barely pierced the darkness ahead. My chest felt tight, but it wasn't the storm or the slick roads that had me on edge. It was what waited for me at the end of this drive. I was on my way to see Rachel, my daughter. We hadn't spoken in years, not really. There had been the occasional text, stiff, formal exchanges like strangers passing in a grocery aisle, but nothing real. Nothing that spoke to the aching distance between us. She had made it clear after my husband's death that she didn't need me in her life. I told myself she was the one at fault, that her anger was misplaced, but deep down I knew better. I'd built walls around my heart, too, letting my pride stand taller than my love. Tonight, I was trying to change that. I had written her a letter the week before, pouring out my soul in ways I never had allowed. I told her I wanted to make things right, that I wanted to see her, that I was sorry. Against all odds, she had agreed to let me visit. That letter felt like a fragile thread of hope, one I was clinging to with all my might. The road curved sharply, and the tires slid just a little, pulling me back to the present. My heart raced as I studied the car. The weather was getting worse. I whispered a quick prayer under my breath, though I couldn't help but feel the hollow space in my words. Faith was something I'd held onto loosely for most of my life, a safety net, a habit, but not a living, breathing thing. And yet, in this moment, I found myself begging, please, let me get there safely. Let me have this one chance. As if in answer, the storm seemed to intensify. The snow came down harder, blinding and relentless. My hands tightened on the wheel as I tried to keep my focus. I barely noticed the patch of black ice until it was too late. The car jerked violently to the side, spinning out of control. I cried out, my voice swallowed by the storm. Time seemed to slow as I saw the guardrail rush toward me. There was a sickening crunch of metal, a jolt that knocked the air from my lungs. And then, nothing. I don't know how long I floated in that void. It was dark, not like the night, but like the absence of everything. Then, slowly, a light began to grow in the distance. It wasn't blinding or harsh. It was soft, warm, and inviting, like the sun filtering through stained glass. I felt myself being drawn toward it, though I wasn't walking or moving in any way I understood. It was as if I was simply being carried. The light enveloped me, and when my vision cleared, I found myself standing in a vast, endless library. Shelves stretched infinitely in all directions, filled with books that glowed faintly. The air was heavy with peace, yet charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I was overwhelmed, my breath catching in my chest, or what felt like my chest. Everything felt different, as though I wasn't in my body anymore, but something more pure. Welcome, Eleanor. The voice startled me. I turned to see a figure standing nearby, radiant and ethereal, their form shimmering like sunlight on water. They weren't human, not exactly, but there was a kindness in their eyes that calmed my fear. Who are you? I managed to ask, my voice trembling. I am a servant of the divine, they said, their voice resonating like music. I am here to guide you. Guide me? My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Am I dead? The figure tilted their head slightly. You are in a place between. Your body is still tied to the world you know, but your soul has been brought here for a purpose. Before I could ask what that purpose was, the figure gestured to the shelves around us. Do you know what this place is? I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes away from the glowing books. It's beautiful, but no. What is it? This is the Library of Souls, they explained. Each book holds the story of a life, a record of every thought, word, and action, seen and unseen. And every soul leaves a mark on the world, whether they realize it or not. I felt a shiver run through me. Why am I here? The figure moved toward a nearby shelf and selected a book, holding it out to me. It glowed brighter than the others, its light pulsing gently, as if alive. This is your story, Eleanor. You are here to see the truth of your life. I hesitated, staring at the book. My hands trembled as I reached out to take it. The moment my fingers touched the cover, it opened on its own, and scenes from my life unfolded before me like pages in a film. I saw myself as a young nurse, comforting a dying man with a touch on his hand. I saw myself helping a neighbor carry groceries, offering advice to a struggling mother at the grocery store, donating quietly to someone in need. Tears blurred my vision. These moments seemed so small, so insignificant when they happened. But now I saw them for what they were, threads in a vast tapestry I couldn't comprehend. The figure touched my shoulder gently, drawing my attention. Your life has had far greater impact than you realize, they said. Every act of kindness, every word of encouragement created ripples that touched countless lives. But then why? My voice broke. Why does my life feel so empty? Why are my relationships broken? If I've done so much good, why does it feel like I've failed? The figure's expression softened. While you gave grace freely to others, you withheld it from yourself and from those closest to you. Your fear of vulnerability built walls where there should have been bridges. This is your greatest lesson yet to learn. I shook my head, the weight of their words sinking in. What am I supposed to do? How do I fix it? The figure's voice was gentle but firm. You have been given one final chance to teach the greatest lesson of all: unconditional love and forgiveness. The choice is yours. Before I could respond, the light around me began to shift, growing brighter and warmer. The library faded, and I felt myself being pulled backward, back into the darkness, back into my body. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, pain and cold flooding my senses. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. The hum of machines surrounded me, and the harsh fluorescent lights burned my eyes. But I didn't care. My heart pounded with something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. I had been given a chance to change, a chance to make things right, and I wasn't going to waste it. The world felt different after I woke up in the hospital. The fluorescent lights seemed sharper, the air colder, and every sound felt amplified: the hum of machines, the distant chatter of nurses, the faint creak of the bed as I shifted. But the biggest difference was inside me. My heart, though weak and battered, felt like it was beating with a new rhythm, one fueled by purpose. The vision, the celestial library, the angel's words, they were etched into my soul. I couldn't shake them, and I didn't want to. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. My first visitor was the doctor, a tall man with kind eyes who spoke in a calm, clinical tone. He explained that I had been found unconscious in my car after the accident. A passerby, a trucker, had seen my headlights in the ditch and called for help. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, his voice tinged with amazement. "Honestly, we didn't think you'd pull through." Lucky. The word lingered in my mind as I nodded and thanked him, but I knew better. This wasn't luck. It was something far greater. Still, I kept that to myself. How could I explain to this man, to anyone, what I had seen? That I had stood in a place beyond this world, that I had held my life in my hands and seen its truths laid bare? I wasn't sure I even had the words. The second visitor was Rachel. She arrived reluctantly, her arms crossed and her eyes guarded. She looked older than I remembered, her face sharper, her expression harder. Seeing her brought a wave of emotions crashing over me: love, guilt, regret. She didn't sit down right away, just stood near the door, as if ready to bolt at any moment. "You're awake," she said, her tone flat. "I am," I replied softly, trying to catch her eye. "Thank you for coming." She shrugged. "You wrote that letter." "I figured." I don't know. I figured I should see if you were okay. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't. I could feel the invisible wall between us, one built brick by brick over years of misunderstandings and unspoken pain. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. Rachel, I'm so sorry. For everything. For all the ways I failed you. Her eyes flicked to mine for a moment before darting away. She laughed, but it was hollow. You've said that before, Mom. It doesn't change anything. I know, I said, my chest tightening. But I'm trying to change. I want to do better. I want to make things right. She shook her head, her expression unreadable. I don't know if you can. I don't even know if I want you to try. Her words cut deep, but I couldn't blame her. She had every right to feel that way. Still, I couldn't let this be the end. Not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd been shown. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, I said, my voice trembling. But I'm not giving up, Rachel. I can't. She didn't respond, just stood there for a moment before muttering something about needing to go. And then she was gone, leaving the room colder and quieter than before. I lay there for a long time after she left, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation over and over. It hadn't gone the way I'd hoped, but I couldn't give up. The angel's words echoed in my mind. You have one lesson left to teach, and it will be the most difficult one of all. In the days that followed, I thought about those words constantly. I thought about the Book of Grace, about the scenes it had shown me. I had seen how my smallest actions had rippled outward, touching lives I'd never even met. But the book had also shown me the cracks, the places where my pride and fear had held me back, where I had failed to give grace to the people who needed it most. If I was going to make things right, I couldn't do it halfway. I had to start with Rachel, no matter how impossible it felt. The first step was writing another letter. This one was different from the first. It wasn't just an apology, it was a confession. I poured my heart onto the page, admitting the ways I had let my own pain blind me to hers, the ways I had let my pride keep me from being the mother she needed. I told her about the accident, about how close I had come to death, and about the divine message I had received. I wasn't sure if she would believe me, but I had to try. When I finished the letter, I folded it carefully and asked one of the nurses to mail it for me. Then I waited. The days stretched on, each one a mixture of hope and fear. I prayed more than I ever had before, not just for Rachel, but for strength, for guidance, for the courage to keep going no matter what. One night, as I lay in the hospital bed, I had a dream. I was back in the celestial library, standing in front of the Book of Grace. The angel was there, their presence as radiant and calm as before. They didn't speak, but the book opened, and I saw a new scene unfold. It was Rachel as a little girl, running to me with a scraped knee. I saw myself bending down, cleaning the wound, and whispering words of comfort. The scene shifted, and I saw her as a teenager, storming out of the house after an argument. I saw myself standing at the window, watching her go, my arms crossed in anger. And then I saw her years later, sitting alone at a table, her face etched with sadness. The message was clear. My choices had shaped her pain as much as my love had shaped her joy. I woke up with tears streaming down my face. The dream wasn't just a memory, it was a call to action. I couldn't undo the past, but I could start building something new. I just had to keep trying. A few days later, Rachel came back. She didn't say much at first, just sat down in the chair by my bed, her arms crossed again. But this time, she stayed longer. I could see the letter peeking out of her purse, its edges worn as if she had read it more than once. I got your letter, she said finally, her voice hesitant. And I asked, holding my breath. She looked away, her expression conflicted. I don't know. I don't know what to think. But I'm here. That has to mean something, right? It means everything, I said, my voice breaking. She didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew I wasn't walking it alone. Rachel's visit gave me hope, but it also left me with a sense of urgency. Her words lingered with me. I don't know what to think, a phrase that felt both like a door cracked open and a reminder of how much work still lay ahead. I couldn't just sit and wait for her to come around. I had to show her, with every ounce of effort I had left, that I was willing to make things right. When I was discharged from the hospital, I returned home to an empty house that felt colder than I remembered. The quiet settled into my bones, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I was truly up to the task. But then I remembered the library, the angel's words, and the vision of Rachel sitting alone, and I knew I couldn't let the silence win. If my life had been about ripples, this was my chance to create new ones, bigger ones, healing ones. I started small. I reached out to Rachel again, this time asking if I could come by her house to drop off some old family photos I had found while cleaning. She hesitated, as I expected, but eventually agreed. When I arrived, I could feel the tension in the air, but I didn't let it deter me. I handed her the photos, pointing out the ones where she was smiling as a child, or where her father and I were beaming with pride. She flipped through them with quiet interest, her fingers lingering on one of her as a toddler, perched on her father's shoulders. "I don't remember this," she said softly. "You were about 3," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'd gone to the park that day. You were laughing so hard because the ducks kept chasing after the bread you were throwing." She didn't respond, but I saw her lips twitch, almost a smile. It was a small thing, but it felt like progress. I left that day feeling lighter, as if the weight between us had shifted just a little. But not every step forward came without resistance. A week later, I called her to ask if she wanted to meet for coffee, and she sighed so loudly I could hear it through the phone. "Mom, I'm busy," she said, her tone clipped. "I have work, the kids, everything else. I don't have time for this." I swallowed my disappointment, forcing myself to stay calm. "I understand," I said, "but if you ever have time, I'd love to see you." Her silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. She still wasn't sure if she wanted to let me back in. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. Years of hurt and neglect don't heal overnight, and I had to accept that. But I also knew I couldn't stop trying. I had been given this second chance for a reason, and I wasn't going to waste it. One night, as I was preparing dinner, I had another dream. This one was vivid and unsettling. I saw Rachel sitting in her home, her face etched with frustration as she argued with her husband. The words were muffled, but I could feel the anger and sadness radiating from her. The scene shifted, and I saw her sitting alone in a dark room, tears streaming down her face. When I woke up, my heart was racing. It wasn't just a dream, I could feel it in my soul. It was a warning, a glimpse of what might come if I didn't do everything I could to bridge the gap between us. I knelt by my bed, tears streaming down my face, and prayed harder than I ever had before. I prayed for Rachel, for myself, for the strength to keep moving forward, even when it felt impossible. The next day, I decided to take a bold step. I reached out to Rachel and asked her to come to church with me. I hadn't been to a service in years, but something inside me told me it was the right thing to do. At first, she flat out refused. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said, her voice tinged with annoyance. "Church isn't exactly my thing." "I understand," I said gently, "but it would mean a lot to me, just this once." There was a long pause before she finally agreed, though her tone made it clear she wasn't thrilled about it. "Fine," she said, "but don't expect me to like it." That Sunday, I waited for her outside the church, my nerves jangling. When she arrived, she looked uncomfortable, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Let's just get this over with," she muttered as we walked inside. The service was beautiful, filled with music and messages of grace and forgiveness. I could feel Rachel stiffening beside me, her body language screaming that she didn't want to be there. But as the pastor spoke about the power of reconciliation, I saw her glance at me, her expression softening just a little. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me hope. After the service, we stood outside the church, the crisp air biting at our faces. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice sincere. "I know it wasn't easy for you." She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "It was fine, I guess. But don't think this changes anything." I don't expect it to, I said. I just, I want you to know how much I love you and how much I want to fix things. She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. For a moment, we just stood there, the tension between us slowly easing. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was a start. As I drove home that day, I thought about the angel's words again. This will be the most difficult lesson of all. They were right. Forgiveness wasn't easy, and rebuilding a relationship wasn't something that could be rushed. But I was learning one step at a time what it meant to truly give grace, not just to strangers, but to the people who mattered most. That night, as I sat by the window, watching the stars flicker in the cold sky, I felt a strange sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The days after the church visit were quiet, but heavy with expectation. Rachel didn't reach out again, and I didn't want to push her too hard, but the silence between us felt like an invisible weight pressing on my chest. I prayed often, not for quick fixes or miracles, but for the patience to keep going, even when progress felt slow and uncertain. My resolve was strong, but the memories of my failures lingered, whispering doubts into my mind. Would Rachel ever truly forgive me? Was I even capable of being the person she needed now? One afternoon, while organizing the old photo albums I had brought back from Rachel's house, I came across a picture I hadn't seen in years. It was of Rachel and me, standing in the kitchen, covered in flour from baking cookies. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her smile wide and carefree. I stared at it for a long time, the image pulling me into a memory I had almost forgotten. It had been just the two of us that day. My husband was working late, and I had decided to keep her entertained by baking cookies together. I remembered how she had laughed when I accidentally spilled a bag of flour, and how she'd thrown a handful of it at me, sparking a playful war that ended with us both covered in white. It had been such a simple, happy moment, one I hadn't appreciated enough at the time. Now, holding that photo, I realized how many of those moments I had let slip by unnoticed, and how much I had taken for granted. I thought about Rachel's life since then, how her smile had faded over the years, replaced by the guarded, distant expression I saw now. My heart ached with the weight of it, and I knew I had to keep trying, no matter how hard it got. Later that evening, I called Rachel again. This time, she answered, but her voice was wary. "What's up, Mom?" she asked, as if bracing herself for something unpleasant. "I was going through some old photos today," I said, "and I found one of us from when you were little. We were baking cookies. Do you remember that?" There was a pause, and then she said, "I think so. Was that the time you got mad because I spilled all the sprinkles?" I laughed softly. I don't remember getting mad. I just remember how much fun we had. You were so happy that day. "Yeah, well," she said, her tone dismissive. "That was a long time ago." I swallowed the lump in my throat, refusing to let her words discourage me. "It doesn't have to feel so long ago, Rachel. We can make new memories, better ones." She didn't respond, and the silence stretched between us like a taut rope. Finally, she said, "I don't know, Mom. It's hard. I can't just forget everything." "I don't want you to forget," I said gently. "I just want a chance to show you that I can be better, that I love you, and I always have." Her voice softened, just a little. "I need time. Take all the time you need," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, feeling both hopeful and frustrated. She was still holding back, still afraid to trust me, and I couldn't blame her. But at least she was listening now, even if only for a moment. That was more than I'd had before. The next few weeks were a mix of small victories and setbacks. Rachel would call occasionally, sometimes just to check in, other times to talk about her kids or her work. I listened carefully, offering support without pushing too hard. Each conversation felt like a fragile thread, something I had to handle with care to keep from breaking. But there were still moments of tension, times when old wounds flared up unexpectedly. One evening, I mentioned a memory of her father, and she snapped, her voice sharp and bitter. You always talk about him like he was perfect, she said. But he wasn't. He wasn't there for me, and neither were you. Her words hit like a slap, but I forced myself to stay calm. I know we weren't perfect, Rachel, and I'm so sorry for the ways we let you down. She didn't say anything, but I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. It's just hard, she said finally. I don't know how to let go of all of it. I understand, I said softly. Take it one step at a time. That's all we can do. That night, I had another dream. This time, it wasn't a celestial library, but a scene of Rachel as a young mother holding her baby and looking overwhelmed. She was crying, her shoulders shaking as she whispered, I can't do this. I wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but I couldn't move. I woke up with tears on my face. The image burned into my mind. The dream felt like another message, another reminder of the ripple effects of my actions or inactions. Rachel's struggles weren't just her own. They were part of a chain that had started long before, with choices I had made, moments I had missed. But it also felt like a call to action, a chance to break that chain and start something new. The next day, I wrote her another letter, this one shorter, but no less heartfelt. I told her about the dream, about how it made me realize how much I had missed in her life. I told her I wanted to be there for her now, not just as her mother, but as someone who truly understood what it meant to love unconditionally. And I told her that I would keep trying, no matter how long it took. When I mailed the letter, I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. I didn't know how she would respond, or if she would respond at all. But I knew I had to keep going. This was the lesson I had been given, the task I had been sent back to complete. And no matter how difficult it got, I wasn't going to give up. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be, even if the path ahead was still uncertain. All I could do now was trust, take each step as it came, and hold on to the hope that grace would guide us both. The day I decided to speak at church, my heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. It wasn't an easy decision. Standing in front of people, sharing something so personal and raw, it terrified me. But the dream, the messages, and Rachel's hesitance all pushed me toward this moment. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything I'd learned, everything I'd been shown in that library. If my life was about ripples, this could be the biggest one yet. I called Rachel 2 days before the service, my hands trembling as I held the phone. When she answered, her voice sounded tired. Hey, Mom, she said, the way someone does when they're bracing themselves. I wanted to invite you to something, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm going to share my story at church this Sunday about the accident, about everything that's happened since. It would mean a lot if you were there. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate, as if she were carefully weighing her response. I don't know, she said finally. Church really isn't my thing. I know, I said gently, but this isn't just about church. It's about us, about me trying to make things right. Please, Rachel, just this once. Another silence stretched out, and I thought she might hang up. But then she sighed, the sound heavy with reluctance. Okay, she said. I'll come. But don't expect a miracle, Mom. I'm not expecting anything, I said quickly. Just having you there is enough. When Sunday came, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I spent the morning pacing around the house, going over what I planned to say. I didn't want to come off as preachy or dramatic. I just wanted to be honest. I wanted Rachel and anyone else who might need to hear it to know what I had seen and learned and how it had changed me. Rachel arrived just as the service was starting. She slipped into a seat near the back, her face set in that guarded expression I had come to know so well. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me just seeing her there. She didn't have to come, but she did. That meant something, even if she didn't say it. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up to the pulpit, my legs trembling beneath me. The congregation was smaller than I had imagined, maybe 30 or 40 people, but it felt like every eye in the room was drilling into me. I took a deep breath and gripped the edges of the podium, trying to steady myself. I'm not a preacher, I began, my voice shaking. I'm not here to give a sermon or tell anyone how to live their life. But something happened to me a few months ago that changed everything, and I feel like I need to share it. I glanced toward the back of the room, where Rachel sat with her arms crossed. Her expression was unreadable, but I could feel her presence like an anchor. In January, I continued, I was in a car accident. It was bad. The doctors told me I was lucky to survive. But what they don't know is that, for a little while, I didn't. The room went still, the air thick with quiet anticipation. I told them about the celestial library, about the angelic figure who had shown me my life in a way I had never seen it before. I spoke about the book of grace, about the ripple effects of kindness and love, and about the painful realization of how I had failed to give that same grace to my own family. I've spent most of my life thinking I wasn't enough, I said, my voice breaking, that I wasn't doing anything that mattered. But I was wrong. Even the smallest acts, things I didn't think twice about, had meaning. They changed lives. And if that's true, then so do the mistakes. The times I let my pride and fear keep me from showing love to the people who needed it most. My eyes found Rachel again, and for the first time, she was looking directly at me. Her face was soft, vulnerable, as if she was letting herself hear the words beneath my words. The angel told me something I'll never forget. I said, my voice trembling. They said I have one lesson left to teach, the most important one. It's about love, not the easy kind, but the kind that pushes past pride and fear. The kind that says, I'm sorry, even when it's hard. The kind that asks for forgiveness, even when you're not sure you deserve it. I paused, letting the silence fill the room. I've spent the last few months trying to live that lesson. It's not easy. Some days it feels impossible, but I believe it's worth it. I believe love and grace are always worth it. When I finished, the room was quiet. A few people were dabbing at their eyes, and I felt a wave of relief mixed with exhaustion. I stepped down from the pulpit and made my way back to my seat, my heart pounding. I didn't know if I had said the right things or if anyone had truly understood, but I had done what I came to do. After the service, Rachel stayed seated as the rest of the congregation filed out. I approached her slowly, unsure of what to expect. She stood up as I neared, her arms still crossed, but her face was different, softer, almost unsure. You really believe all that? She asked quietly. I do, I said, my voice steady. Every word. She looked down at the floor, her brow furrowed. I don't know if I can just forgive everything, Mom. It's not that simple. I know, I said gently. And I'm not asking you to. I just want the chance to keep trying. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, to my surprise, she stepped closer and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a long hug, and it wasn't tight, but it was enough to make my heart swell. Thank you for saying what you said, she murmured. It meant something. I held back tears as I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. It means everything to me. As she pulled away, she gave me a small, tentative smile. I'll see you soon, okay? Okay, I said, my heart light with a hope I hadn't felt in years. As she walked away, I stood there, letting the moment settle into my bones. The road ahead wasn't clear, and I knew there would still be challenges. But for the first time, I felt like we were truly on the same path. And that was more than I could have ever asked for. In the weeks that followed my talk at church, something began to shift between Rachel and me. It wasn't sudden and it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. She called more often, and when she did, her voice carried less of the cold edge I had grown used to. She even invited me over for dinner one evening, something that hadn't happened in years. Sitting at her table, surrounded by the chatter of her kids and the comforting clatter of dishes, I felt like I was finally stepping back into her world, piece by piece. That dinner was the first time I'd really seen her as a mother. She was firm but loving, guiding her children with a patience I wished I had possessed when she was young. Watching her with them brought a pang of both pride and regret. She was an incredible mother, despite everything, but I couldn't help but wonder how much better things could have been if I had been more present when she was growing up. After the meal, as the kids ran off to play, Rachel and I lingered at the table, nursing cups of tea. The conversation turned quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For once, the silence felt like space rather than distance. "You were really good with them tonight," I said, breaking the stillness. She shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I have my moments." "No, really," I insisted. "You're a wonderful mother, Rachel. I hope you know that." She looked at me, her eyes soft but skeptical. "That means a lot coming from you." I mean, I didn't exactly have the best example growing up. The words stung, but they weren't said with malice. She was just being honest, and I had to respect that. I nodded slowly, taking a deep breath before responding. "You're right," I admitted. "I wasn't the mother you deserved. I've spent so much time regretting that, Rachel. If I could go back and change things, I would in a heartbeat." She didn't say anything at first, just stared down at her tea. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "I've been thinking about what you said at church, about forgiveness." I held my breath, waiting. "It's hard," she continued. "I don't know if I'm there yet, but I'm trying. I don't want to keep holding on to all this anger. It's exhausting." "I know," I said softly, "and I'm not expecting you to forgive me overnight. Just knowing you're willing to try means more than I can say." She gave me a small smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes but still felt like progress. "We'll see," she said, "one step at a time." Those words stayed with me long after I left her house that night. One step at a time. It was the same mantra I had been repeating to myself since the accident, and now it felt like we were walking that path together. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it finally felt like we were moving forward. In the months that followed, our relationship continued to mend, slowly but surely. We spent more time together, sometimes with her kids, sometimes just the two of us. The conversations grew deeper, more honest. She even started asking me about the accident, about what I had seen and felt. At first, I wasn't sure how much to tell her, worried that she might think I was crazy. But the more she asked, the more I realized she genuinely wanted to understand. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever wonder why it happened? Why you got to come back?" "All the time," I admitted. "At first, I thought it was just luck. But after what I saw, I think it was more than that. I think I was sent back for a reason." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "And you think that reason was us?" "I know it was," I said without hesitation. "The angel told me I had one last lesson to teach. But the truth is, I think I'm the one who needed to learn it." She looked at me then, her expression unreadable. "What lesson?" "Love," I said simply. "Not just the easy kind, but the kind that pushes past fear and pride. The kind that forgives. The kind that tries, even when it's hard." She didn't say anything for a long time, but I could see the emotions flickering in her eyes. Finally, she whispered, "That's not an easy lesson." "No," I agreed, "but it's the most important one." As the weeks turned into months, I started to see the ripple effects of that lesson, not just in my relationship with Rachel, but in other parts of my life as well. People from the church began reaching out, sharing their own struggles, and asking how I had found the strength to keep going. I didn't have all the answers, but I told them what I knew, that grace isn't something you earn, it's something you give. And the more you give it, the more it grows. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I had another dream. This time, I was back in the celestial library. The shelves stretched endlessly around me, their soft glow filling the space with warmth. The angel was there, standing by my book, which now shone brighter than before. "You've done well," they said, their voice filled with gentle approval. "Is it finished?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Not yet," they said, "but the most important pages are being written." When I woke up, I felt a deep sense of peace. The work wasn't done, but I was exactly where I needed to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next.